Alright, let's keep rolling on our walkthrough for Hoard of the Dragon Queen, Book 1 of the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. Today we're covering Chapter 2, Raiders Camp. I'm Dad the Dungeon Master. I've been a DM for over a decade. I am a published author and I have run this campaign for multiple groups, so I have made every mistake and I'm going to help you guys avoid those. Let's dig in. So Chapter 2 starts the day after the attack in Greenest. The raiders have all fled, the blue dragon is gone, and the townspeople are picking up the pieces of the mess that's left. Your party definitely wanted a long rest after the events of Chapter 1, and the raiders didn't leave until 4 a.m., so best case scenario, they get up around noon because they need 8 hours for their long rest. Shortly after the characters wake up, Governor Nighthill will approach and make them an offer that if they track the raiders back to their camp and find out a certain set of information, he will pay them 250 gold pieces each. He wants the party to find out where the raiders' camp is, who they are, who their leaders are, what motivated their attack on Greenest, and where are they going to strike next. He says that if you find any of the treasures that were stolen and can return them, that's great, but finding out the information is more important, and he will do his best to cobble together a reward from what's left of the town's treasury. But that's a little bit confusing because he already said that he was going to give everybody 250 gold pieces. So why they mention that he's going to cobble together what he can from the town's treasury, I'm not sure. I don't think that's supposed to be an extra reward. I think that's just how he's going to get the 250 gold pieces. It says that any supplies and gear that the characters need for their trip will be supplied by the town. Don't let your players go crazy and get a bunch of random stuff, but if they want like some climbing gear, a tent, some rations, I basically tell them they can have anything from the adventurer's gear list that's worth less than 50 gold pieces. When the party goes to leave, a monk with an injured left leg approaches. His name is Nesim Waladra. He says that he would love to accompany you on your trip to find the raiders, but with his injury he would only slow you down, and that you probably haven't heard of his master, but that you need to hear about him now. His master's name is Leosin Erlanthar. He's a monk from Berdusk. He went missing during the events of the night before. He says that his master has been investigating these raiders for months and that he either infiltrated their group last night or worse, got captured and carried away. He found his choker, this little necklace with a dragon symbol on it, ripped off basically laying on the ground. He tells you that he's already sent one of his order back to Berdusk to get help, but it will be days before they come back. And he hopes that you will look for his master whenever you get to the raiders' camp. He tells the party that the advantage to them, if they find him, is that all of the information he's gathered on these raiders will be invaluable in defeating them. When the characters go to track the raiders, it's super easy to find tons of footprints leading to the southeast. It's easy enough to tell that there are bunches of humanoid, kobold, and trained lizard tracks, and if the party succeeds on a DC 15 perception check, which really it should be survival, if you're tracking something, survival is the skill you use. So with a DC 15 survival check, they can tell that some of the footprints are deeper on the way back than they were on the way here. The reason for that is because they were carrying a bunch of loot. But it says don't just come right out and say it. Let the players figure that out on their own. And I kind of like that it gives you little tidbits of advice like that if you're a new DM. Like experienced DMs know, like give them the information, let them come to their own conclusions. But if you're new, it is nice that the book gives you those helpful little hints. And it says that there are so many footprints that it is impossible to tell if any of them belong to prisoners. The trail leads about 12 miles to the south, and the rolling green hills of the green fields give way to rocky cliffs and plateaus with an occasional wandering stream set down in a deep gully. On the way from Greenest to the raiders' camp, you can have two possible encounters. One with a group of stragglers who are kind of just a bunch of idiots, and one with an organized rear guard that is trying to stop anyone from following the raiders. The Stragglers is 4 humans and 8 kobolds that have basically set up just a little cook fire in the middle of this bowl, like this low area with some tumbled boulders around. They kind of thought they were picking like a defensible place, but actually the boulders and the terrain just make it easier for other people to sneak up on them without being seen and offers no real protection. When you get up there, you hear the humans and the kobolds kind of bickering amongst each other. And if you take a second to stop and watch, you can tell that the humans are kind of trying to act like they're the leaders in charge of the kobolds, but their leadership amounts to nothing more than just like shouting, belittling insults at them. And as you watch, the 8 kobolds will take their part of lunch. They're cooking some game hens over a fire. The kobolds will take their half-cooked part of the lunch and go off like 50 feet to the side to eat. And the 4 humans will sit there and bicker with themselves. They just love bickering over how to cook the hen. The party can easily bypass this group and just keep going, but if they do, there's a chance that this group will accidentally come upon them from behind while they're dealing with other things later on. And it is actually to the player's benefit to try and get some information out of these guys. So I'm not saying to tell the party, hey, these guys might have information, but if you're running it for a newer game, hinting at that might not be a bad idea. The book also says that as long as you don't give yourselves away, you can get a surprise round on these guys. Again, surprise rounds are not a thing in 5th edition. If the party wants to sneak up on them, you have them roll stealth, and you compare it to these humans' passive perception. If they roll higher than their passive perception, they are surprised for the first round. If you're surprised, that means you can't take actions, bonus actions, or movement on your first turn, and you can't take a reaction until after your first turn. But it's individual. It's not the whole group is surprised or the whole group isn't. It's each individual is surprised or are not surprised. So don't use a surprise round. Ignore that it says surprise round. There is no such thing as a surprise round. So the book has this set up so the kobolds won't join the fight until the 4th round. The humans apparently have their weapons sitting out of easy reach. So when the party attacks, it says to give them a surprise round. Obviously, you're not going to do that, but some of those guys, if not all of them, are going to be surprised. So they spend their first round surprised. Then their first active round, it says they spend grabbing their weapons. So they're basically not getting to take an action for 2 rounds. Your party will have slaughtered all 4 of these guys before they ever get a chance to fight back. And then it says that the kobolds, if there are no humans left by the 4th round, they just run away and are never seen or heard from again. So there won't be any people left at the end of the 4th round. So I just ignore the kobolds. I basically have them, when they see the party attack, they're just like, not my problem, and run away. The humans, I let them get their weapons as in interact with an object without taking an action. And if they're not surprised, they can go ahead and fight on the first round. And if they are surprised, they can react like normal and fight on the second round. They're still going to be overwhelmed. Your party is still going to handle these guys very easily. The book has it set up so that if you interrogate one of these guys, he will give you information about the rear guard and where they might have an ambush set up. The book says that it takes a DC 15 intimidation check to get him to tell them about the rear guard. That information is very important, because if your party approaches that rear guard and gets ambushed, there is a strong likelihood that they're getting slaughtered, because the rear guard knows what they're doing. They're set up in a good spot. They are ready to attack. It's a lot like the ambush from the mill in Chapter 1. So what I do is, when it gets down to the last human, I have him throw his weapons down and beg for mercy and tell them that he has information that could save their lives, that if they let him live, he will tell them exactly what they need to do not to get slaughtered by the rear guard. Then it's a DC 15 intimidation check to make him tell the truth. And most parties will at least let him talk. They don't all let him live afterward, but they will usually at least let him tell them the information. And if they threaten him in an effective way, if they role play effectively, I give them advantage on the intimidation check. If they succeed on that check, he will tell them that the rear guard is most likely on these 2 rocky bluffs that come close together about a mile further on. He doesn't know the exact size of the rear guard. He knows the location of the raiders' camp and that they were carrying back prisoners, but he doesn't know exactly who the prisoners were or if it included a half-elf monk. He will say that they were instructed to get loot. He knows this because they were told to get gold and gems and any other valuables. He also will tell the party that they are gathering loot for the great Hoard to honor the Dragon Queen. I go ahead and tell my party that at this point. They don't know that it's like a tribute for the resurrection of Tiamat. They just know it's in some way going to honor her. So I feel like you're giving them a piece of the information, but not all of it. And I like that. I like the little breadcrumbs of what's happening to kind of get strung out a little bit further than if you went by the book, they would have known exactly what was happening in the first chapter. If you're able to capture one of the kobolds and question them, they will tell you all kinds of crazy stuff. It's not because they're trying to mislead you, but kobolds will literally tell you whatever they think you want to hear just to try and live. They are cowardly by nature. The cultists have 28 silver pieces on them. The kobolds actually have a sack with like some candlesticks and dishes and religious carvings from the Temple of Shantaea because they ignored the rule about not looting for themselves. But you're probably not going to find that because the kobolds are just going to run off. But if you wanted to, you could say they left the sack behind. That way you can recover some of the valuables that were taken from the town. The second possible encounter on your way to the camp is the rear guard. The book says that if they get information about the rear guard from the stragglers, they pretty much have two options. They can either avoid it altogether, which they say is actually the better thing because, one, it avoids a damaging fight, and two, if the rear guard doesn't check in, then the raiders are going to know that something is up. So best thing for the party is just for the rear guard to check in like nothing's wrong. This always makes me think of that scene from Star Wars when Han Solo's like,
"We're fine, we're all fine here now, thank you."
So, best case scenario, your party avoids this altogether. But if they choose not to go around or they didn't hear about it from the stragglers, the rear guard is 1 veteran, 6 cultists, and 2 acolytes. As the stragglers told you, the path will go between these 2 rocky bluffs, and the ambushers, the rear guard, will be up on those rocks. The book has this explanation for different distances where your party can recognize the ambush, that if the stragglers told them about it, with a DC 10 perception check, they can see the ambushers from 200 yards away. Which I also think it's funny that this book says yards sometimes, because I don't think any of the other campaign modules ever says yards. It's always feet. Like, they wouldn't say 200 yards. They'd say 600 feet. So that kind of cracks me up. That's another way that this book is just a little bit more free range than most campaigns you're going to read because it was just made so early on. And then it has this part where it says if the stragglers mention the rear guard, but they didn't say the likely location, that it's a DC 15 perception check and you can only see them from 100 yards. But all they have is a DC 15 intimidation check, and it says that the stragglers give you all the information. So there's really no way to get some of that information and not the other information unless you just forgot to tell them. And if you forgot to tell them that, the chances that you remember all these different distances and perception checks is very slim, I think. But either way, if you don't know about the rear guard, with a DC 20 perception check, you see a face staring down at you from the rocks when you're within 20 yards. And if the party says that they are looking for people on those rocky bluffs, they get to make those checks with advantage. So I don't do all that. What I do is, if they know about the rear guard, as they approach, when they're 600 feet away, they can see them. A DC 10 perception check is almost not worth rolling, and then once you give advantage, because if they know about it, they have advantage, a DC 10 perception check with advantage is basically automatic. So I just say if they got the guy to talk, they see them when they're at about 600 feet. That's if they decide to keep approaching and don't just swing wide around. Because these tracks are wide, there were dozens of people going back and forth, it would be super easy to just circle around and catch back up with these tracks further on. Basically, the rear guard was told that they can either handle things one of two ways. If there was a small enough group, their job was to attack and destroy them. And if there was a larger group, like a small army or whatever, the town's militia, they were to harry them as they fled back using guerrilla tactics and send a message to the raiders' camp to let them know what's happening. The book says that if your party is 6 or less, they will just attack. If you have 7 or more, they'll send a messenger back to the camp, and that they probably wouldn't attack. But if you want to have them attack, just add enough raiders so that they have 2 or 3 more people more than your party. That is decent advice on how you can adjust and encounter on the fly, though they are kind of just being a little bit loosey-goosey with it, whereas most of this book, they try and hammer it down into real solid structure. So if you're a new DM and you're running for 7 or more people, you are already neck deep in bullcrap anyway, so good luck. But my real advice would be go ahead and have the raiders attack with the numbers they have. Don't worry about adding the extra people. It's going to be hard enough to manage your 7 party members and these 9 cultists already. You don't need throwing in extra people and trying to figure out what to do with them. Just run it how it is. It'll be fine. In general, D&D games are supposed to be balanced for 4 adventurers, a party of 4 people. I don't know what guidelines they were using when they made this book. We're just doing our best to do the best that we can with it. If, with all that, your party still is unaware that they're about to get ambushed, when they get into the area, the cultists will push boulders down on the party. Everybody has to make a DC 11 dexterity save or take 2d12 bludgeoning damage, half as much on a success. This is pretty rough for a level 2 party. If they roll decent on that damage, they could knock some of the party unconscious. They could knock them all unconscious if they roll max damage, unless you have a barbarian with like a +4 con. So if the worst happens, if your party kills all the stragglers without interrogating them, if they fail all these perception checks and they walk into this trap, it's going to be rough. And to be fair, it probably should be rough because they've had multiple chances to avoid this and didn't. So I think I've only had one party in the like half dozen times I've run this go into that ambush without seeing that they were going to get ambushed. And when I did, I lied about the damage. I rolled 2d12, but I rolled like a 9 and a 10. I rolled pretty high. I don't remember exactly. And I cut that damage in half. Because once that happens, then you roll initiative. The book says something about a surprise round again. I'm just going to quit mentioning when it says surprise round. Just from here on out, if the book says surprise round, ignore it. So while the party is down in there, the cultists have 3/4 cover from their vantage points, so they get a +5 to their AC. It is only like 10 or 15 feet to them. It's difficult terrain, so it takes double movement, but everybody should be able to get up into combat, into melee if they want to, with their 30 feet of movement. So at that point, it was still tough. I had a couple of party members go unconscious, but they had some good rolls. They did what they needed to do, and they survived. So the one time that I had a party walk into this, it was brutal, but they lived. But they got lucky on some of their rolls. So most of the time, I would say if a level 2 party walks into this, they're not coming out alive, which it is an ambush. That makes sense. But again, especially if you have a new party, you probably want to try not to TPK them, because your role as a DM, yeah, run the game. Yeah, the game should be dangerous. Yes, death should be a possibility. But your ultimate goal is to make it fun. And this is a game where you can't load your last save. So everybody dying, not a whole lot of fun, especially in maybe your second session ever playing D&D. So just keep that in mind. If your party walks into this ambush, they may not walk back out again. If you happen to capture and interrogate one of these guys, they are like dedicated cultists. They are harder to break than the earlier stragglers. It takes a DC 20 intimidation check to get them to talk. And even with that, the only things they will reveal is that they are initiates with the Cult of the Dragon, the names of their leaders, Resmir, Frulem Mondath, and Langdarosa Cyanrath, and that Resmir's in charge, and that they are gathering treasure for the dragons. So there's another confusing little tidbit at the end of this. The rewards that are listed is the XP for the monsters, like always. I'm not going to tell you guys about XP every time because milestone leveling is what you should be doing. And if you're doing XP, you know to add up the XP from all the different monsters. The only time I'll tell you about it is if they give XP for other things, which the book occasionally does. But the other reward is the uniforms of the cultists in the rear guard. And the book says that this could be invaluable when trying to infiltrate the camp. The reason this is an issue is because when you get to the camp, which is the next thing, and you try to infiltrate it, you have to roll a charisma check. The book doesn't say what, but it's deception. Or if you have proficiency with a disguise kit and you've come up with a disguise, you can roll with your disguise kit proficiency if that's what you're doing. But it actually says you roll that check with disadvantage if you're wearing the uniforms from the soldiers, because most of the people coming back into town are not in uniform. They're mostly mercenaries and hired guns, basically. And to fit in with them, you wouldn't be wearing a uniform because everybody who has uniforms are kind of well known. So if you're wearing those uniforms and they don't recognize you, that'll be a problem. I get the logic in that. The problem is, it says earlier in the book, it says right here in the rewards for the rear guard that their uniforms could be an invaluable resource when trying to get into the camp. Problem number 2 is, if you're running it for a newer party and they come up with this clever idea to use the uniforms of the soldiers to break into camp, and then you immediately punish them for that clever idea, I feel like that kind of teaches them a bad lesson. You want people to come up with clever ideas. If your party thinks of using their uniforms as disguises, I think you should let that work. Anytime that I do it and the party thinks of that, I give them advantage, not disadvantage. Because part of what you're doing is teaching your party how to play D&D. If they're new. If they're veterans, whatever. But if your party's newer, you're teaching them the ways that they can come up with things to solve problems and help them have more fun, help them understand how D&D works. So if they have a clever idea and you immediately punish them for it, they're going to quit trying to do things like that. So I don't like that part. It's kind of like raising a kid. If you punish good behavior and reward bad behavior, like you give them a toy if they're screaming, then you're going to have a little butthead. D&D parties are basically the same way. They're just overgrown children. So you want to try and reward what you see as good D&D player behavior and punish what you see as bad D&D player behavior. And that varies by table, but there are some pretty universal rules like don't be a butthead to your other players, don't steal from your other players, don't cause problems for the whole party because that's what your character would do. So you are kind of, as the DM, in charge of teaching them, Pavlov's dogs, ringing the bell every time you give them food to just kind of condition them on what's being a good player and, what mistakes are going to cost you in the game. The Raiders camp has certain features. It is like a slowly rising slope with 2 levels inside of a big horseshoe-shaped plateau that raises up to like 150 feet up above with cliffs surrounding the camp. There are piles of boulders at the bottoms of some of these walls. They count as difficult terrain, but they also provide 3/4 cover. The brush spread around some of these areas is like 4 to 6 feet tall and it is thick and dense. So it also counts as difficult terrain, but it also provides 3/4 cover for anyone that's inside of it. The cliffs are riddled with caves along it in random places, and there's a pretty funny line in the book about how most of these caves have conveniently placed boulders or bushes at the mouth so that it would be a safe place for the party to take a long rest. I just think that's super funny that every one of these caves has conveniently placed boulders or bushes, but I think the reason they put that in there is for when your party finishes chapter 2, if they don't want to go all the way back to Greenest before coming back for chapter 3, which is kind of silly, they can just hide in one of these caves, recuperate, take their long rest, and they can just peek out and watch what's happening in the camp below and see everybody leaving and all that stuff that happens the next day. So these caves, while yes, they are especially convenient and a little bit of like a weak plot device to give the party exactly what they happen to need at that moment, it is good that they are there. There are 2 guard towers, one right at like the entrance to the camp. They're 20 feet tall. They're made of like large, rough timbers. They're lashed together with ropes. And the other one is up on that little ledge near the top of the cliff at the back. The one down below is manned by kobolds, and the one up at the top is manned by cultists. There's a room for like a few people in each one. There are currently 8 prisoners in camp, and they are kept in Area 1. The prisoners are put to work during the day, and then at night they are shackled to a post inside one of the huts nearby. They are attached to the post with chains just to keep them from escaping. If you have thieves' tools, you can pick those locks with a DC 10, which if you get captured, they would take your thieves' tools away. Or you can break the chain with a DC 20 athletics check. Also, you can unlock them if you have a key from one of the guards. When the prisoners are out working, they are overseen by 4 dragon claws, so it would be tough to escape that situation. If for any reason you have to use the prisoner's stats, like the party helps them break free and they're fighting or whatever, they use commoner stats. The cliffs are fairly steep, but they have good enough handholds and footholds where the book doesn't say that you should make an athletics check if they're just climbing under regular circumstances. If they're hurrying, it's a DC 10 athletics check to climb. And if they're trying to be quiet, it's a DC 10 stealth check to avoid knocking loose any boulders or making any other ruckus. I like to have my players roll an athletics check either way, just because to me, climbing a vertical surface, even with handholds and footholds, it is not something that just an average person could do, so there is a chance of failure, and anytime there's a chance of failure, your players should roll. There is a ladder like bolted to the cliff that goes up to the guard tower, so if they're climbing that ladder, there's no need for a check. The tents around camp are circular like a yurt, and they're from as small as like 5 feet high and 10 feet wide to like 10 feet high and 25 foot wide. And they have wooden or bone posts with hide covers, and some mud and sod is used to hold everything together. The tents down on the lower level near the entrance to the camp are rougher. They are inhabited by kobolds. It's mostly kobolds on this first level. And then the tents up on the higher level further back into the camp are nicer. They're the ones inhabited by the human cultists. That one big tent in Area 2 is set aside for Resmir, Frulan Mondath, Langdarosa Cyanrath, and Esbara Jos. There is an honor guard of 4 veterans and 4 guard drakes that keep watch over this tent day and night, and they do not fall for tricks. They do not sleep at their post. Basically, they don't take any BS. They're kind of like those royal guards that stand outside the castle in England. They're not even going to listen to the party. They're not going to give them the time of day. Their job is to keep people away from that tent, and they go about that business with fanatical devotion. There are a few members of the cult that they recognize by sight, and those few members are allowed to even approach. So this is one of those times where players tend to think that a nat 20 can solve every problem. Some things are just impossible, no matter what you roll, unfortunately. And I had a player in one of my games that went to talk to these guys. He rolled a nat 20, and he was so upset when it didn't work. And I had to explain, like, if you ask a king to give you his crown and give you control of his kingdom, and you roll a nat 20, you just avoided being executed. You didn't get the kingdom. Some things are just impossible. So you may end up having to teach your players that lesson at this point. I did at that time, and he was still pretty irritated about it. He got over it, but it's a lesson every player has to learn at some point. So there are some really awesome, really fun ways that this camp can be handled, but it's one of those things, it's like really slippery to hold on to because it's role play, it's checks. The book has a couple listed, but there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of stuff going on. So this is a little bit tough for a newer DM, but if you handle it properly, this chapter, this section of this chapter is so much fun. When I first started, I thought combat was the most fun, most exciting thing about D&D. But once you play D&D more and more, you start to see that like the interactions with NPCs, the role playing between characters, the solving problems in fun and unique ways, the kind of amorphous things that you can do in D&D that you can't do in like a video game or a more structured board game. That's where the real magic happens. That's where the real creativity comes out, and that's really what makes playing D&D special. And this camp is a fertile garden for that type of creativity, but it has to be handled kind of delicately by the dungeon master. And some of their suggestions in the book are really solid, and some of them are a little bit confusing or even antithetical to what you're trying to do. So with that being said, the first day after the attack, security in camp is still pretty lax. It says that stragglers are still trickling in throughout the day, which the book doesn't mention your party seeing any other humans, any other cultists or mercenaries as they approach the camp. I like to do it so that they kind of end up kind of in a, not a crowd, but there's a few other people. Like the road gets busier and busier as they get closer to camp, and they are starting to kind of blend in with people at that point. Like before they even get to camp, there's a few people here, a few people there ahead and behind them on the road. So with that lax security, the leaders, Resmir, they think that there's no way that anybody's tracking them at this point. They are all high on successfully raiding Green Nest, and everybody's just kind of worn out and kind of more relaxed than usual. So this first day is actually the best day to try to get into camp. Most of the people coming in are not in uniform because a lot of them are mercenaries and a lot of them don't wear their Cult of the Dragon regalia whenever they go on raids because they are not necessarily trying to broadcast to everybody who they are. So this is the part where I was saying the book says that if your party puts on those cult uniforms, they actually stand out. So if your party just tries to blend in and enter camp, they have to make a DC 5 charisma check. It doesn't say what skill, though deception is the appropriate skill to use. And if you're wearing the Cult of the Dragon uniforms, you have disadvantage. As I said, I think that's not cool because you're teaching them not to think of clever ways to go about using what they find. So when my party does think to use the uniforms, I give them disadvantage instead of advantage. Whichever member of your party fought Langdarosa Cyanrath, they have a -4 on that check because he saw them so close up, which makes perfect sense. And if any member of your party fails that check, these are individual checks, it's not a group check, that individual member is recognized at some point. The book makes sure you realize they don't get recognized immediately. It has a really solid piece of advice right here. They get recognized at the moment when it would have the most dramatic impact on the scene. I love that. There are some parts of this, some advice, little nuggets that they sneak in that are great advice. The book itself is a little bit of a mess, but they understand storytelling on a certain level that some of the books don't have in there. They don't have like those little tidbits of DMing advice. Also, because everything is going to kind of wind down after this day, things are going to get back to normal. If your party decides to wait and watch and not enter the camp, once sunset happens, there will be very few people going into camp, and the camp will be resuming its normal amount of alertness. So, if they try to enter after sunset or the next day, there will be a security checkpoint basically with 5 guards. And at that point, your party has to try and talk their way in, requiring a clever story and a DC 10 deception check. If your party fails this deception check, then they get turned away. Don't have the guards immediately like take them prisoner. Just be like, hey, you guys don't belong here, and send them off. And then your party has to either use stealth or subterfuge to try and get in after that. The book suggests they could like climb up the plateau, and using the underbrush for cover, they could get right up to the edge and either just watch the camp from above or climb down using the cover of darkness. Either one of those is perfectly viable. A DC 10 deception check is not crazy hard, and your party probably has at least one member that has high charisma that kind of acts as the face a lot of the time, especially newer parties, but even veteran parties. A lot of them, they have like that one person, not character. They have the one person, real life, that they know is like the talker. Some parties have a couple, some parties mix it up, but a lot of parties have one, maybe 2 people that do 90% of the role play because that's what they enjoy. They have a couple guys that just want to be there for combat. They have a couple people that just like gathering loot and building characters. And you have 1 or 2 people that like to roleplay. So if you have a character that has a decent charisma and they're rolling the deception for the whole party, the chances of them not succeeding on that DC 10 is pretty low. If a single human cultist body is found, or several kobold bodies, then an alarm is raised. It makes sure you know, like, if you kill 1 kobold, they're not really going to care. But if they find like a half a dozen kobolds murdered, they're going to be like, hey, something's going on. But it just takes 1 person. I didn't write the book. It's not my fault that their lives are valued unequally. But if the camp goes on alert, everybody has to make a DC 15 charisma check. Again, it doesn't say what skill to use, so I just let them use deception. If they fail, they are spotted, they're pointed out as a stranger, an infiltrator. If they roll less than 10, they're specifically recognized as somebody from Greenest. The book says that if they immediately start trying to fight their way out after being noticed, they could potentially make their way out of camp. But if they try and spin tails or they hesitate, a group of cultists that outnumbers them 5 to 1 will quickly surround them. And if the party tries to estimate how many raiders are in this camp altogether, there's like around 100 kobolds and like 80 cultists. They make sure that they give you a great piece of advice. They can't win. Fighting is not an option. So it doesn't really make sense when they say if they start trying to cut their way out immediately, they might make it. They can't make it. Everybody who's not currently fighting them is going to use their actions to dash, and they are probably using their actions to fight, so they can't outrun this horde of people. So if they get spotted, they're going to be captured. Now, these checks are made individually, and in general, it's kind of looked at as a bad idea to ever split up the party. And for players, that's usually true. But this chapter, specifically the way that it works, especially the rest of this after they're spotted, it's really fun actually to have players doing individual things. And what I will do is instead of having like initiative, once they get split up, like say a couple of them get captured, then I will start going like turn by turn and giving each person a few minutes to play their role. And the way that I do it is, so let's say you have a party of 4, 2 of them get captured, 2 of them fail the roles, they get recognized. The other 2, I give them the chance, like you guys can just kind of blend into the crowd. You don't have to get captured with them, and it might be better if you don't, that way you could help break them out. More experienced parties are going to think of that on their own. And then those people that don't get captured, one of the possibilities is they get like recruited for guard duty, and I think it is hilarious for a party member to get brought along to guard to look out for people like themselves. So it's like, no, I don't see anybody, but you can have them chat with the other guards that are where they're at. You can have the person that doesn't get pulled into guard duty and also doesn't get captured. They can try and like sneak around and do some recon on their own. The two that get captured, you can have one of them get tied up next to the monk and talk to him, and you can have one of them get forced into doing manual labor, and then they can talk to the other prisoners or listen to the guys that are overseeing them. And so you have 4 party members that are all split up, but you take all the information that they're supposed to learn and you divide it up amongst the 4 of them, so each one of them is getting a piece of that information. And then when the characters who didn't get captured come back later to break those guys out, once things kind of die down a little bit, they can all share all that information. They all took part in getting the information. You didn't just sit there and lore dump from one NPC all of this information onto the party. And so it's actually a little bit more fluid, a little better flow, and a little bit more fun for each party member if you get them all kind of split up and learning things from different areas so that they can come back together later. And a side note, as I go through these situations, the book mentions how the regular cultists should be treated with an indifferent disposition towards the characters, while the kobolds are a little more angry, they're a little more volatile, and they should be treated with a hostile disposition. And this affects their charisma-based checks. This is one of the most overlooked, most forgotten rules from the DMG for D&D 5th edition, and I love that this book brings it up because, again, this is one of those things that a veteran DM handles by feel, like how an NPC feels towards the party and how that affects the rolls that the party is making, like the DCs for persuasion and things of that nature. But having these finite numbers that you can find in the DMG, it's like in the 240 somethings, I think, you can find the rules for how an NPC's disposition affects the way that the charisma checks are rolled. That's a really great framework for new DMs to go by before they develop that kind of feel for how to run the DCs for charisma-based checks. The members of the party that are captured have their weapons taken away and their hands tied, and they are brought before Frulan Mondath for questioning. If any of the party members rolled less than 10 on that charisma check and they were recognized from the fighting in Greenest, it doesn't matter what they say to Frulan Mondath. They are always going to be sentenced to be executed at dawn and then taken and tied to a post next to the monk that they were looking for. At this point, they can actually communicate with him, and that party member can learn some things from the monk. They have one night to either wriggle free of their bonds. If they somehow hid some thieves' tools to pick the locks, they can break the chains if they have the strength. And it says if all else fails that the monk has a little knife he had hidden and he'll cut them free. But that is lame. You want to try to avoid at all costs having an NPC save the day. Your job as the DM is to make the party feel like heroes, not to make them feel like they're hanging out with your NPC heroes. One of the worst feelings you can give a party is like there's no reason for them to be here because the NPCs are doing all of the important stuff or the NPCs are always saving them. That is no bueno. The party are the heroes. Your NPCs are the side characters. If a party member didn't roll less than 10 on that check, but they admit to Frulan Mondath that they were in Greenest and that they are enemies of the raiders, it's the same effect as if they had been recognized in Greenest. And anybody who decides to lie to Frulan Mondath and make up a story, like maybe they're checking out the cult before they decide whether or not they want to join, they can roll deception against Frulan Mondath's insight check. In the book, it just says wisdom check. It's insight. You roll insight to oppose deception. And the way that works is when you roll deception, you set the DC for the insight check. So if it's a tie, the insight wins. She sees through your lies and you're taken and tied up just like the other 2 occasions. If you succeed and you roll higher than what she rolls, then you're set free, but you are watched carefully, and if you try to leave camp, you are stopped. The book gives another great little tidbit of advice here. It says that if your characters come up with an especially plausible or implausible lie, that you can offer advantage or disadvantage based on their role playing. This is a great way to help teach your players how to be better at D&D. People role playing really well should be rewarded. If they do that and they don't get anything for it, they're going to stop trying so hard. And if they don't do it and everything turns out exactly the same, they've got no reason to try. Now, some players are just never going to roleplay. That's fine. But if they put in the effort, they should get the reward. So there's a long list of information that the party members can learn through any of the situations that I talked about earlier. Whether they're sneaking around camp and listening to people or finding little bits of paper with stuff written on it inside tents, or they're on guard duty chit-chatting with their fellow guards, or they've been pressed into manual labor and they talk to the other prisoners or listen and overhear the people overseeing them, or they're tied up next to Leosin. The book also says if one of the party members asks too many questions, gets a little bit too pushy, to feel free to have them roll that DC 15 check again, just like when the camp was put on alert, and have the same results happen if they fail. So let's go through this huge list. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. That way you guys can see it also, instead of just trying to keep up as I prattle along for 5 minutes just saying this whole list of different information. This is a camp of the Cult of the Dragon. Praise Tiamat's glory. Some cultists extend their right hand with fingers outstretched to represent the 5 heads of Tiamat when they praise her glory. Others curl back 2 fingers to show that Tiamat's strength is hidden. This is not mandatory, but adepts and hardcore cultists look favorably on those who do it sincerely. This would be a deception check. Not everyone here is full-fledged members of the cult. Many are new initiates working toward full acceptance, and many others are simple mercenaries hired to flesh out the camp's strength during raids or if it should come under attack. Kobolds are here because their worshipful attitude towards dragons makes them easy for Rezmir and other high-ranking cultists to manipulate, but they are not well liked or trusted by other races, which the party could turn to their advantage. Hunters who bring in antelope and other large game from the grasslands feed the camp. The cultists and their allies eat most of it, but some is stored in the cave to feed the hatchlings. That's an important little tidbit because one of the things that's kind of a mystery here is what those caves are used for. So you're starting to kind of figure out that there are hatchlings in there. What kind of hatchlings it doesn't say, but maybe another party member will figure it out. The cult has been ranging far and wide on small raids to collect treasure. Greenest was the closest target to the camp, the biggest of all the towns they've attacked, and the most profitable. Praise Tiamat's glory. Prisoners are used for manual labor. In the past, a few have converted and become loyal members of the cult, but most die eventually of overwork and undernourishment. Then they are fed to the drakes or taken into the cave to feed the hatchling. Again, hatchlings get mentioned. The cave at the back of the camp, Area 4, is off limits to all but those who've been cleared by Mondath and Rezmir, which includes a handful of guards and kobolds. It's known around camp as the Nursery, and it's an open secret that Rezmir plans to hatch a clutch of dragon eggs there. So one of the party members will find out they're dragon eggs that are in this hatchery. The half-black dragon Rezmir came to the area a few months ago, and she set up the camp. Mondath handles the everyday operation. The half-blue dragon Cyanrath is Mondath's right hand and is seldom far from her side. He has a rigid sense of honor, but you don't want to make him angry. And we talked about that before. I like having him be a pretty honorable guy, just on the other side of this conflict. That way in the next chapter, when you confront him, there's a little bit of a moral choice there. The mother of dragons, praise Tiamat's glory, shall return. And when that day comes, all the nations of the world shall tremble before her majesty. I don't necessarily give that information at this point because I want the party to still kind of not know that the main goal is the resurrection of Tiamat. I want them to know that they're working towards gathering riches. At this point, I want them to realize this is the cult of the dragon. But as far as the big plan, the resurrecting Tiamat plan, I feel like it's too soon in the story to give that information out. I want my party to feel like they have to work to get all of the clues to figure out what's going on. I want them to feel like they earned it. The monk is of special interest to Rezmir. Why else would she keep the creature alive that way? What Rezmir hopes to learn from him is anyone's guess. But you wouldn't want to be in the half-elf skin, or what's left of it, when the questioning gets serious. The plunder from nearby settlements is stored in the cave. No one but Rezmir knows how much is there altogether, but it must be a big pile by now. The characters that don't get captured, or if nobody gets captured, the second biggest hassle about being in camp is that an officer selects you for duty. They can send you to go work doing food prep for a few hours, send you to a guard station in a tower, have you practice weapon drills, or even possibly clean up after animals. Usually the prisoners do that, but it says that prisoners are running short, so they might have one of the free people do it. I usually reserve that for the prisoners. So, based on the 4 different possibilities of what your characters are doing, whether they're pressed into service, which I usually use guard tower duty, whether they are still roaming around free in the camp, whether they are a prisoner being forced into manual labor, or whether they're tied up next to Leosin, this is how I divide up that information through those 4 areas. This is what I have each person find. That way, when they come back together at the end, they all put it together, they have the information. You'll notice that nowhere on this list is the fact that they're trying to resurrect Tiamat. Leosin, the half-elf monk, is tied to a stake. He has been badly beaten. Resmir knows from contacts throughout the Sword Coast that he has been researching the cult, that he's found out information about them, and she wants to know what he knows and who he's told. And she considers it a big stroke of luck that he was captured during the raid. She doesn't realize he got captured on purpose. He knew that Greenest had a pretty good amount of money and that it was pretty poorly defended, so it was a likely location for their next attack. And during the night, he actually fell in with the raiders and retreated with them. That doesn't really make sense considering that his choker was found ripped off and his staff was found snapped. I don't know why he would leave those clues behind to make it look like he was captured. I think that was just an oversight when they were explaining it. This is one of those holes in the narrative I talked about that sometimes slips through. I usually don't mention that he left with them on purpose. The book says that he left with the raiders on purpose and that when the sun came up, that Resmir herself quickly recognized him and had him captured. I just leave it so that he intentionally let himself get captured that night. That way I don't have to explain why he ripped his necklace off and broke his staff, because it doesn't make sense for that to have happened if he left pretending to be one of them. And he considers this all a big success. He knows most of the information that I listed a minute ago, which is how he fills in what the party doesn't find out on their own. And even though his mind is still strong, captivity has been a lot harsher than he thought it would be, and his physical body is badly damaged. So badly damaged that instead of having monk stats, he uses the stats of a commoner with disadvantage on attacks, and he can only move at 20 feet per round. There's a paragraph in here that's always seemed a little bit weird to me. It says that he's not entirely happy about being rescued because he thinks that there's more that he can learn, but because he's so weak that they can just take him against his will. And then it says if he's not rescued, he breaks out by himself later, and then when they meet back up, he refuses to talk about it. So the way it's written, it kind of seems like he's going to be upset either way. He's upset if you take him, but he's also upset if you leave him and won't talk about it. So I just ignore that. I have him be thankful that they're rescuing him, because while he feels like his mission was a success and he learned a lot, again, he wasn't ready for how brutal they were going to treat him. And I don't like him saving the day with his private knife that he has secretly hidden. So I have him actually be grateful when the party rescues him. But he is still messed up. He still can't travel well. And that's actually the reason I use to explain why the party doesn't head all the way back to Greenest. I have him say, hey, I overheard they're supposed to be breaking camp tomorrow. I can't travel very well. And especially if the party rescues the other prisoners, I have him suggest, let's hide out in one of these caves and watch what happens if we wait while they leave tomorrow. There'll be a lot less people here and we can come back and check things out. And that's how I do the transition from chapter 2 to chapter 3 without having them run all the way back. Again, I usually run chapter 2 first and have them start as prisoners and escape and then do chapter 1. But when I have run it in order, chapters 1, 2, 3, that's how I keep them here. I don't have them travel all the way back to Greenest and then travel all the way back here. It just doesn't have a good narrative flow like that. Once Leosin is taken from his spot, it only takes the camp 5 minutes to notice he's missing. The book says that if the party rigs up a dummy and ties it in his place, that gets them a bonus 20 minutes. I've never had a party do that, but it also says that if they tie an unconscious or dead cultist in his place, preferably a half-elf, that will actually buy them about 2 hours. I have had parties do that, so usually it's just going to be one or the other. They're not going to put somebody in his place, or they're going to put a dead cultist in his place. It doesn't say if the camp notices that the party members are gone from their stakes where they were tied up. So I kind of just gloss over that usually. I don't bring it up, and the parties usually don't bring it up. I think I had like one party ask about it, and I was like, yeah, they don't really care about you guys as much. They know that this guy's like the special prisoner of Resmir, and they're afraid of the punishment they're going to get if they let Resmir's special prisoner escape. That's why they pay more attention to him. Even though your party's probably not going back to Greenest right now, whenever they do get back to Greenest, they will get the 250 gold pieces each for completing this mission. If you're using milestone leveling, which you absolutely should be, your party will now go up to 3rd level. The book realizes there aren't a lot of combats in this chapter, so they gave experience for a bunch of different little things. I'll throw that up here just in case you're wanting to use experience points. I don't want to go through every single little thing that they give points for, but at this point, you're either back in Greenest or better, hiding in one of those caves, taking a long rest, and waiting to watch the raiders retreat tomorrow and figure out what you're going to do after that. You have finished chapter 2. If you've made it this far, throw me a like. If you want to keep up with this campaign, see some other campaigns I've done walkthroughs of, the ones I'm going to do in the future, any of the other videos I like to do, go ahead and subscribe. If you like what I do, you like how I do it, you want to help support me, help me keep making these videos, I have a shop live on my channel now. I have memberships live. Shout out to GL, Sammy J, Jose, Cody, and Silent Wraith, our channel's 5 members. Thank you guys. Making these videos takes a lot of time and effort and money, and your contribution helps out a lot. Here are some other videos I've done that you guys might like. Thanks, guys, and God bless you.